In 2006, with the Nintendo DS and PS2 dominating the market as the gaming world was entering its 7th generation of modern home consoles, Bethesda Game Studios released The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion on the just-released Xbox 360. It was coming off the heels of solid success from the previous title, Morrowind, and brought at that time industry-leading physics and AI engines, a more linear story to draw in a larger player base, and while Morrowind purists will tell you otherwise, a lot of Elder Scrolls fans consider it the best Bethesda game, selling more than 2 times that of Morrowind. A lush, open world where you have freedom of exploration and quests to uncover, a now trademark style of Bethesda RPGs. Fast forward to 2011, after a couple of successful Fallout games, albeit one coming from Obsidian, Skyrim was really primed to take over the mainstream audience. Oblivion sold well in 2006, about 3 million copies in its first year, but at the time, games like Madden, FIFA, Mario, and Pokemon were the dominant forces, pushing over 5 million copies each, New Super Mario Bros. Leading the way at nearly 9 million. But Skyrim was bringing their engine and their style to the next generation, streamlining and simplifying some of the RPG elements, exploration that felt limitless, and that made it the 3rd best-selling game in 2011, even as Call of Duty was becoming the juggernaut we know today. Skyrim was so successful, we got a bunch of now memed re-releases, but it's the 7th most sold video game title of all time. Bear with me a minute, because there's a point to all of this as it relates to Starfield, I promise. Skyrim is one of my favorite games of all time. I've put in hundreds and hundreds of hours into this game over the last decade plus since its original release, and ashamedly have bought its re-release more than once. I bring all this context up because I believe Bethesda has had a huge hand in making Western RPGs what they are today. In my mind, Bethesda games are sort of a gateway drug past the surface level Call of Duties and sports franchises most gamers and non-gamers are familiar with. No disrespect to those games, I still play them as well. But Skyrim was that title you took to your friend's house who only ever played Halo or Call of Duty and said, trust me, you need to play this. They aren't the only studio that makes games like that. Zelda games are almost a parallel on the Nintendo side of the gaming space, but you see where I'm going here. I have a lot of love for Bethesda games, so when Starfield was announced as their first new IP in nearly 30 years, I was excited. The possibility of encountering an Oblivion or Skyrim or Fallout-like gaming experience was high, and while Bethesda definitely delivered a game familiar to their signature RPG formula, I couldn't help but be frustrated as I realized this game is conflicting with the past, present, and future of games. Many gameplay design elements have been iterated and improved upon in the decade plus since Skyrim's release, so at the surface level, it's a gameplay loop I know and love and did have fun with, but the more I thought about my 100 hours playing this, along with my gaming experiences over the years, the less it holds up to scrutiny. Starfield is a fun Bethesda game, but it may have promised a bit too much leading up to its release. This is a review of Starfield. Hey, Danny with the DMGT here, your new favorite place for all things music, gaming, and tech. I apologize for the 3-minute preamble on Bethesda games, but hey, hopefully that beats some of the cookie-cutter game review intros. As a footnote, I did play this exclusively via cloud on Game Pass. My GPU has been dead for most of the year since the Diablo 4 beta bricked it, and I don't have an Xbox, so while there were a few hiccups, it actually held up great. I'll address this again for any points on performance, it's not a ton in this video. Alright, so like I mentioned, I usually have a bias towards Bethesda games, with the exception of Fallout 76, I'm on board with their games. I didn't really have a ton of problems with Fallout 4, Skyrim's in my top 10 games ever, good memories with Oblivion, it's just a gameplay loop I really enjoy. So let's start at the top with Starfield, particularly the player creation because I think that sets the tone. Don't worry, this isn't a weird pronoun rant, we're chill here. The player creation options are cool, nothing crazy, but what I really want to dig into a bit are the background and traits. Background was a cool addition in this game because depending on what you choose, you get unique dialogue options that can trigger quest lines and specific starting abilities, and the traits can give you additional perks such as decreasing the amount of oxygen used when sprinting. It's effectively the stamina bar. All pretty cool in theory, right? Well, the idea and promise of them are, but in practice they don't really live up to the expectation, and that's a bit of a recurring theme here. You see, dialogue trees to give you a sense of sprawling storylines has been attempted many times, and they tend to lead to the same place with the exception of some minor changes in the responses from NPCs. This isn't a unique problem to Bethesda games, most notably the Mass Effect series ran into this towards the end. But in a year where we've had a breakthrough in this game mechanic via Baldur's Gate 3, it becomes a bit more noticeable that Bethesda hasn't really changed the structure in 20 years on this front. So when you're given the illusion of a unique build out but eventually reach a point of unity, pun intended, in the character builder, ship builder, outpost builder experience, it becomes a bit homogenous, and not just in the game itself but in the context of their other titles. Let's get into more specific examples here to illustrate what I I mean. I selected a gangster background because I wanted to do a bit of a space pirate run. I knew I would join the Crimson Fleet at one point, so why not start with some skills that should help with that. As the main storyline kicks off, spoilers for the Crimson Fleet questlines, but not the main story, there are some instances where that background gave me some unique options, but they got me to the same point anyways. So I do a few quests, grab another couple artifacts for consolation, get some of them as part of my crew, and suddenly I get snatched up by the UC SysDef. Hey man, you're like kind of a bad dude, or at least that's what your past says. Anyways, you're the perfect person for this top secret espionage mission to take down the Crimson Fleet. So why don't you go down there and join them, but also report back to me and we'll take them down. In return, I don't know, we can't expunge your record technically because, you know, top secret, but it'll be totally chill if you do this for us. Also, if you don't, we'll artificially increase your bounty, but don't worry about that. Fine, whatever, sign me up to the space pirate, baby. This questline is not bad, at least at the key you run into some fun characters with personality. Constellation members, on the other hand, have the personality of rocks, but I'll get to that. The overall quest structure is solid, although I did have some gripes, primarily escaping the legacy. You're totally f***ed if you don't have like 100 stim packs, med packs. I hated this one. When I inevitably sided with the Crimson Fleet at the end, the Conde was all, I can't believe you've done this. I thought for sure the guy with the criminal background had for sure turned it around. Sure, bud. But that wasn't what grinded my gears. It was that afterwards, every single Constellation companion had the same exact reaction. Now, I wasn't exactly expecting them to all jump for joy, but those companions felt like such a step back from Fallout 4. It was disappointing, frustrating. They were homogenous. They had the same exact moral compass. The kicker? There were no in-game world consequences for this, bar the occasional hostile SysDef ship. This effectively holds true for all the other factions. You can join them all freely with little to no in-game consequences. A step back, in my opinion, from Fallout 4. Not only did Bethesda not iterate on this faction structure, in some cases they stepped back. Let's move on to gameplay and exploration, because here's where most of my internal conflict occurs, believe it or not. If you've never played a Bethesda game, particularly a Fallout game, the gunplay is not quite as tight as games you may be familiar with, like a Halo, Call of Duty, or even games like Apex and Fortnite. It all feels a little floaty, although Starfield does have the tightest gunplay controls of a Bethesda game. Overall, I enjoy the weapon variety, the different damage types and ammo types. I like that they incorporated weapons here, so as you're exploring around, you have an incentive to loot. Gunplay in Zero-G is really fun and works very well with Bethesda's style of gunplay, and even though spaceship battles were very minimal, they were fun to do. It's just nice to be on your ship and just start shooting around at other ships. Challenges to unlock different tiers for the different abilities that you select as you level up, I think, is a very intelligent way of incorporating gameplay variety. On the flip side, most of the enemies that you encounter in this game operate very similarly, and even though there are a few notable alien creatures that you encounter that I won't spoil for you, there's a bit of a lack of enemy variety to really encourage those challenges that you're doing besides unlocking those tiers. Now, even though this game isn't super buggy for Bethesda standards, there are bugs, but most of them I found pretty funny. The AI in particular here is rough. I know that Todd Howard has said that it was intentionally done this way to dumb it down and keep it more fun, but I just wish more intelligent enemy AI was optional in the higher difficulties outside of them just doing a bunch of damage and becoming bullet sponges like they always do. To be clear, it's not that different from past Bethesda games, but you get where I'm going here. Therein lies the issue. There's no iteration on it. There's a bit of a problem with the weapon variety and the ammo that's available for those weapons. You pick up a new weapon and, oh wait, do you have the right ammo? Let's go back to a vendor, which means loading up a bunch of menus, fast traveling, and loading screens. We'll get to that in a second as well. If by any chance there's a single person that hasn't played this game yet and is watching this review, the biggest recommendation I have for you is to buy all the ammo and all the health packs, and then increase your physical attributes, because stupid encumbrance means that you get slowed down all the time. Now, luckily, there is an additional mechanic in this game in the form of your spaceships to start transferring your items to. I'm not going to harp on encumbrance too much. It's a common complaint that gamers have with games like this, but it is a problem in this one. Now, as far as exploration and those menu screens and loading screens and fast traveling that I just alluded to, some of the chatter online is driving me nuts, because a lot of people are saying like, this game was never supposed to be an exploration game, and that is just wrong. The Starfield Direct, just 1 month before the release of Starfield, had an entire section dedicated to exploration. Exploration in this game is not fun. The actual action of getting from point A to point B is very tedious. Where in Skyrim, do you remember when Todd Howard at an E3 said, do you see that mountain in Skyrim? You can walk up to it and explore it directly, and as you go up that mountain, you will encounter different NPCs, enemies, different quest items. Bethesda tried doing the same thing with this game, saying,
that isn't just a backdrop. That moon is actually there orbiting the planet. Yes, you can visit it too.
That is not one seamless transition. You have to enter your ship, which is a loading screen, get to your cockpit, enter the star map, select the planet, fast travel to it, which is another loading screen. When you arrive at the planet, you're in orbit of that planet, you have to land on that planet, which is another loading screen, leave your ship again, which is another loading screen, and now you're at that planet. I'll be fair because I can already hear the comments. I know that you can fast travel when you're in proximity to the ship and skip some of the sequences. Now, I understand that this was never supposed to be No Man's Sky, but at the same time, that is not a seamless experience. And it is not crazy for gamers and reviewers to bring that up as a misrepresentation of what the experience would be like, considering how previous Bethesda titles function. There are things to do and explore once you arrive to planets, in particular the ones that have major settlements and cities, and even the smaller ones to some degree. But the vast majority of these planets are barren, have minimal sights, and you have to walk everywhere for minutes at a time to reach a point of interest where you just scan something, you find a resource, and then you leave. I've read all the reasonings and I understand why Bethesda did not put in land vehicles to explore these planets, but it is still a huge miss in the exploration experience. Look, I want to give Bethesda some credit here because this was a massive undertaking to have this many planets and give you the sense of exploration through a galaxy system. Unfortunately, the trade-off that we got was a tedious way to explore and reach other destinations, and it is just a clear step back from previous Bethesda titles. Now, a lot of people will say, well, there's a mod that addresses a lot of these things, and while that is 100% true and something that I will be applying once I get a new GPU, why is that an excuse? Bethesda is not an indie studio. They are literally backed by the second largest technology company in the world. It's a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and I don't think it's unreasonable to have some of these issues addressed. Now, to be clear, this is not a critique at anyone in particular putting in hard work to create these games. I have a deep respect for video game developers and anyone involved in releasing the video game. I'm convinced that a lot of them are passionate and care about delivering a high quality product. I just don't think that it's a case of, oh, it's just another gamer on YouTube complaining about games for the sake of complaining. But just so much menu time and loading screens, they kill me. I'm gonna loop back around to the shipbuilding and base building and some of the weapon tiers after I talk about some spoilers in the story, because there's a massive mechanic with New Game Plus. Before I get there though, let's briefly touch on music and sound design. The sound design is really strong. It might be some of the best sound design in a Bethesda game. I really enjoyed the space synths and the harmonies of temples and the guns and the ships. The sound design team at Bethesda did a fantastic job of incorporating these futuristic sounds without them sounding too synthetic. There are still some really warm tones to it, the way that the ship engines sound, the way that the guns sound, these all changing depending on the environment that you're in and the planet that you're on, I think is a very cool touch. Huge thumbs up to the sound design team. I think this is an area that is often overlooked in video game reviews, which is crazy to me because we also spend so much time talking about graphics, and one of the most impactful things on your senses for a game is the sound and the music. Speaking of the music, on the other hand, unfortunately for me, it felt very forgettable for the first time ever in a Bethesda game. It's grand and big and wondrous, but it's not memorable. There's no melody that really sticks out. I think part of this is because it was built in a way to give you that sense of wonder and scale of space, but when you compare the melodies and the themes to Fallout and the Elder Scrolls, there wasn't a ton in the composition side that really stuck out for Starfield. Also, as a side note, I think there was a huge missed opportunity for a space radio station or something. It was just a very cool feature that I enjoy from the Fallout games. To have some music going in your ship, I thought would have been a really cool implementation, but that's more of a wish list thing than an actual critique of the game. And lastly, let's talk about the story and the writing. Spoilers for the ending of Starfield because there's huge implications for how New Game Plus works, and I really recommend experiencing that for yourself. I've always felt that Bethesda has strong writing, but not necessarily the best narratives, which makes sense. When you have open world exploration RPGs, you want players to have the flexibility to go anywhere and encounter something that they're interested in. Most side quests and faction quests are relatively self-contained, but they do a solid job of world building. Starfield is not all that different. The main storyline is a bit of a drag the first 10 hours or so, but the overall concepts of exploration, the ideas of what it means and what it costs to explore and to reach other destinations, and then you inject a bunch of sci-fi multiverse stuff in there, it's super fun. The juxtaposition of the hunter and the emissary is so meta. At a high level, I love this because in general, I'm just a fan of space things. I follow the James Webb Telescope. I'm interested in space and planets and what NASA's doing and all of that exploration stuff in the real world. Starfield approaches all of this head on. There's some interesting meta commentary that most Bethesda games have, but the actual narratives and storylines tend to be a little bit more disjointed. It is quite common for a Bethesda game to have stronger side quest stories than the main quest. I think part of that is because the narratives tend to be a little bit more self-contained than the side ones, whereas the main quests tend to be a little bit bigger in scale. but the execution of the storyline in Starfield into the gameplay is tough because it feels like I'm playing against myself by the time you get to the Unity. What I mean by that is, by the end of the game, if you decide to enter the Unity in order to continue to increase your abilities and to continue to get better weapon rolls, you leave everything in that current universe and state behind. It's sort of a soft reset, a new game plus, but without the ability to like change your background, which I thought was weird. You keep all your experience and the skills that you've attained, but you lose your cargo, your money, your ships, your bases. Everything that you've done that isn't story related or quest related is gone. Well, you could just say, well, I'm not going to go through the Unity, and the game allows you to do that, but then you miss out on additional game content that is locked behind New Game Plus universe resets. There are a handful of very rare universes in Starfield that you have a chance to run into every time you enter the Unity, so that encourages you to continue to progress down that path. But is that worth the trade-off? Because like in other Bethesda games, you're building your homes or you're building your bases, you're establishing trade routes, you're finishing quest lines. It's kind of like, what's the point? And I understand what Bethesda was trying to do with that, right? That's sort of the meta commentary. That's kind of the point, the concept and that feeling. I'm on board with that. But Bethesda games are exploration, progression, RPGs, not super strong narratives. So these ideas just clash in their execution. It's sort of how I felt about Red Dead Redemption 2. On that front, I understand what the hunter and what the emissary are supposed to represent, but in practice of the gameplay itself, it's a little frustrating. And despite all of that, I had fun and I enjoyed my time with Starfield. I want to come back with mods and set up bases and do the task management and build ridiculous ships because it's all a familiar feeling, the same feeling I get when I start yet another Skyrim file. Starfield will still be that game for many people, like Skyrim was for me, that will open the floodgates to different types of games that isn't just your mainstream Call of Duties and Fortnites and FIFAs. Unfortunately, it's no longer 2011 and it shouldn't feel like I'm picking up Skyrim again. I do want some level of novelty outside of the concepts and the settings. Bethesda hyped themselves up with this and delivered a fun game, but not the definitive space RPG they envisioned. Expectations can make or break you, and while in a normal year the sheer scale of this could push it over the hump for Game of the Year, it stumbles into the nomination instead of contending for the win. Starfield gets a 4 out of 5. Alright, that's my review of Starfield. I hope it didn't feel like I was dunking on it too much. I was trying to balance out the enjoyment that I did actually have with this game, but no one will watch a 1-minute review video of, hey, I had fun with this game. Play it. And while I don't really consider myself a video game reviewer or critic, I'm just sharing my thoughts. I do think deeply about these things, and hopefully somebody benefits from some of the insights that I'm providing here. Okay, I have some other videos coming up soon about music stuff, some tech stuff. The iPhone 15 Pro Max review is coming very soon. On top of those two videos, I'll have a review of Baldur's Gate 3 up before Spider-Man 2, because I'm also going to be spending a ton of time with Spider-Man, and then probably Alan Wake, and then we're going to head into end of the year stuff. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, maybe consider sharing it with a friend, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.